Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thanks for taking a moment to click a like button on the YouTube channel, to subscribe to our channel, and to click the bell icon to get reminders for upcoming episodes.
Each week, Todd and I will be talking about the gospel lectionary reading for the upcoming weekend. And our hope is that we'll talk about this passage in the context of love and inclusion and societal justice, that our conversation, our talking will be just as in justice, and that also something will be said during this conversation between the two of us that might inspire you alongside with us to do more in our Jesus following than just talking.
So this week we are in the Gospel of Matthew. Stay in Gospel of Matthew, and we're in chapter 16, verses 13 to 20, and uh, doing a little identity work with the person of Jesus. So Herb, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so the reading this week is the famous passage in Matthew where Jesus asks, "Who do the people say I am, and who do you say I am?" And Peter says, "Well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "On you I'll build my church." Um, so it's a central passage for some sectors of Christianity. Um, but just if we're going to be talking about this in the context of justice, I think we need to just once again practice the utmost care anytime we're dealing with the Messiah claims regarding Jesus in the Gospels, that we don't drift into Christian supersessionism or anti Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those would be my burdens this week in our conversation.
Yeah, I think it's just unfortunately, and I've been a Christian for 49 years, and I've been paying attention to this stuff for 25, 26 years, and it's just been too easy for Christians to use this as a dig against Jewish people for not accepting Jesus as Messiah. This is just it's just too easy to do. It's been a way of lessening the faith of Jewish folks, and making them sound foolish or stubborn or evil for not accepting Jesus as the true Jewish Messiah. And um, that's we cannot do that. We have to recognize that the Jewish faith, in and of itself, is a beautiful tradition with much that it can offer. Yes, it's human and flawed as a human tradition, just as Christianity is a flawed human tradition. But to lessen it, to lower it, because they don't accept Jesus as Messiah, is just to be unfair and unkind and disrespectful of the faith.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here. The Jewish wisdom has a lot of wisdom, right?
Yeah.
And I would defend a non-Christian view of Jesus. If we just look at it, an ethical view of Jesus, saying what the principles that Jesus taught with ethics and values in the context of justice
Mm-hmm.
and society, I would say that the idea that Jewish people reject those values is a lie. Most of
Right.
them, especially the way that rabbinic Judaism evolved after the mid to late first century, the way that it evolved with love and compassion and kindness and justice, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard when you go back and look at those. If you are a Christian that practices according to the justice tradition within Christianity, it's really hard to find a lot of difference. So,
Mm.
there may be a rejection of Jesus in name because of
Mm-hmm.
the way Christians have treated Jews, possibly. I don't know the whole, I don't want to oversimplify that relational dynamic between the two traditions. But I will say we're largely we have laid some huge stumbling blocks and attached those to the name Jesus
Hmm.
that I
Hmm.
can see how problematic that is. But if you go back and look at what Jesus was about, you'd be hard pressed to find a human being that would say, forget just Jewish. I mean, any human being that would say
Right.
those things are bad. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So there's a lot there. And something that helps me too, and I want to kind of unpack, kind of peel back the layers of the Messiah thing in Christianity too. It's helpful to remember that the original Jewish hope had nothing to do with getting to heaven. It was all about injustice,
Hmm.
violence, and oppression being put right on earth here
Right.
and now.
That's right.
Right. So, whatever we say about Messiah, it's got to be about that first and foremost.
Right.
It wasn't the Christian Messiah of the definition of Messiah where Jesus comes and dies so that you can go to a happy place when you die. You know, that
All the
that
Hebrew
wasn't,
passages,
yeah,
all the prophets, all the Hebrew passages that Christians use to identify Jesus as Messiah, all are pointing to a liberation and a justice for people in the here and now. None of it had to do with going to a different universe in a by and by time.
different realm. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
no, it's all about immediate redemption, immediate liberation, immediate justice for all. And so it's only the writings of the Christian scriptures that try to start taking a tack towards the afterlife. Um, Before that, everything that points to any kind of messianic, and I know you have some scriptures you're going to point to, Herb. These all point to current a current liberation.
Yeah, very much in this life change. So I'm not going to take the time to actually read through them because there's it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the ones that I have three from Isaiah. Isaiah 9:7, beautiful. Talks about the greatness of the government and peace will last forever. There'll be no end.
Yep.
It'll be, a reign that establishes justice. We have Isaiah 42, verse 1, Isaiah 51, verse 4, and then Micah 4, 4. You know, all of these are good examples of that Jewish hope being looking forward to a time when all injustice, violence, and oppression are made right. Um, the idea of Messiah really doesn't come from the Hebrew scriptures, doesn't come from what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. And I think that's important to remember too. That when we talk about
Mm-hmm.
Messiah, they there were sectors of Jews that looked for the restoration of the kingdom of Israel, where David, the anointed one, the king, would sit on David's throne again. And the
Mm-hmm.
hope was not just that he would sit there, but that all of this restoration of justice would be through that
Mm-hmm.
restoration of the throne. And the king was God's anointed one, which is what the term Messiah means. But the development of this idea of a Messiah, it really came about through rabbinic Judaism. It really was developed during that time, and that was the time in which Christianity was just first starting. The early Jesus followers were developing at that time alongside of these
Mm-hmm.
ideas about the Messiah and their development. That was all happening simultaneously. And it's in that context that the gospel authors say, yeah, our Jesus is the Messiah. What you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for in the Messiah is what Jesus came, or it was their claim of what Jesus was coming to accomplish. And again, I mean, repeatedly, it's not, it wasn't, even the rabbinic definition of the Messiah wasn't about getting to heaven. It was about Jewish liberation that would grow to
Right.
envelop the entire world, where not just injustice against the Jewish people would be undone, but injustice
Hmm.
globally would be made right. And that's where Christians, for better or for worse, the very first identity of Jesus being the Messiah came from. It wasn't so much about Jewish liberation for them, once again, for better or for worse, but it was about justice being established on the earth. And I mean, Isaiah, or not Isaiah, Acts 17:31 is a passage that shows that too, that Jesus is the one who was raised from the dead, and it's by him that the world will be reordered with justice, it says.
Hmm.
So again, this was an idea that was contemporary for when the gospels were being written. They lifted it from, in the same way that gospel authors lifted certain things from Roman culture and said Jesus is the son of God, like Caesar, the savior of the world.
Hmm.
The
Right.
you know all of these terms that we've gone over in the past, that are terms that were actually used instead of the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. They preach the peace of Jesus. In the same way they lifted that language from Roman culture to say Jesus answers those hopes and desires and needs, they lifted this language of Messiah from the rabbinic Judaism of the time and said Jesus
Hmm.
also meets those needs. And it is fascinating to me too. I'll just throw this in there real quick, that in the Gospels, Jesus never claims messiahship for himself.
Right.
It's always his followers that are
Hmm.
saying he's the Messiah. They're the ones that are always naming him such. And I think that's actually how it happened in reality. I think that's giving us a window into what was
Hmm.
happening
Hmm.
during the writing of the Gospels.
Yeah. I think I think it is so important to understand culturally what early Christianity was trying to do. Um, it is very much operating out of its own time and place, and we have to always understand that is to take this and to just to remove it from its context and remove it from where it was written and what was going on. So much of the errors, so much of the what I would consider heresy of the Christian faith comes from not reading this in the context of being written in a time of Roman occupation and of historical the prophecies and the historical experience of the Jewish people. Without those contexts, you can totally turn this into something other than it is, and do a lot of harm with it.
And what it's been turned into is a defining of Messiah or messiahship as being he who died for you, so that, and
Mm-hmm.
paid your penalty so that you can go to heaven when you die. That's what Messiah means to
Right.
most Christians. And then they turn around and they deride the Jewish community for not accepting Jesus as their Messiah. And all of that ignores the original context.
That's right.
Jesus was never, and we never see Jesus going around trying to get people to say a sinner's prayer so
No.
that they can go to heaven when they die. We never see Jesus explaining his death as in the language of
That's
penal
salvific.
substitutionary.
Right.
Yeah. We never see that. And so again, all of this does it history has proven exactly what you just said. When we remove it from its original context, which is justice being established in the here and now, that concern, then then it can morph into some
Mm-hmm.
pretty destructive stuff. So what speaks to me most though, and I don't use the language of Messiah in my own claims about Jesus. I think that there's a better way we can be more life-giving in our approach to injustice than
Because
just
of the
talking
baggage
about
that comes with Messiah. If you could use
right,
Messiah without the baggage, fine. But you
right.
can't because of the baggage that goes with it.
But at the same time, I think it's more life-giving to talk about establishing justice through us than through messiahs or heroes.
Right.
The old adage that we are the ones we've been waiting for. That
Mm-hmm.
John Dominic Crossan is famous for his statement that, you know, we're all waiting on God to intervene and God's all waiting for us to cooperate, to participate.
Hmm.
You know, and so this
Hmm.
idea of messiahship too often leans into just waiting around for, you know, some third
Right.
party to come in and do it when
Right.
we're supposed to be involved. But again, the language of the Messiah, if in its original context it's left, it can still, there's the burden there is about justice and about oppression and about
Hmm. Hmm.
nonviolence, doing the end of violence. And that still can provide a lot of traction for Jesus followers today. Even if
Right.
you separate it from the language of Messiah, the rhetoric of Messiah,
Right.
if you leave its original meaning of establishing justice in the here and now, then that gives Christians something to work towards.
Right. But it also then allows it to align very nicely and beautifully in the tradition of Judaism, and it can align very nicely within the tradition of Islam, where it can really honor, where Jesus is honored as a prophet in Islam, and where Jewish rabbinical teachings and the prophets of old speak very much in line with the mission of Jesus. That it actually aligns in the Abrahamic faith tradition very well, and honestly, we need desperately. I would think if there was, if a special prophet came along, if someone came along who rose up at this time and place, to speak what the world needs about reconciliation and justice and harmony between different peoples, one of the things that they would work on, I would think, would try to bring peace between the three Abrahamic traditions, which represent so much of the population of this world. And if we
Mhm.
could find a way to unite in the justice and compassion work of the prophets,
Yeah, those things are
uh,
universal.
those things would, and if we could honor that without requiring that everyone has to believe in Muhammad as the prophet, or everyone has to believe in Jesus as the Messiah and anything like
Right.
that, but instead honor what they bring together in seeking for justice in the world, it would be a wonderful thing. And it doesn't, and
Sure.
it wouldn't devalue or undermine the importance of Jesus and what Jesus did. It wouldn't undermine the importance of the prophets of Judaism. It wouldn't undermine the importance of Muhammad.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, I couldn't agree more, Todd. But also, anytime we talk about Christians working for justice, there is a part of me, there is a voice in my head that says, "You have got to be kidding me." And that's because of the harm that still, even presently, Christians are responsible for. And I want to be
Sure.
very clear about that.
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about the LGBTQ community, Christians are still largely responsible for the continuation of homophobia,
Yeah.
transphobia, and biphobia in our society today. We talk about the rights of women that have been removed because of the work of Christians over the last 40 years here in
Right.
America, you know, and the way that politicians are trying to appeal to to a certain sector of Christianity, but a large sector of Christianity. That's what's led to the removal of women's rights in our present political climate. But two. So in saying all that, I want to acknowledge that we don't get to just sidestep all that stuff and say, no, we
Mm-hmm.
need to be about making the world a better place. I think we also need to name where we're making the world not a better place, but a worse place.
Yep.
And maybe, like Peter said, you know, if we're going to start making the world a better place, maybe judgment should start with the house of God. Maybe the place where we address racism and homophobia and patriarchy and misogyny and classism and xenophobia and all that stuff
That's
isn't
right.
by preaching to the world what they should do, but first making sure those sins aren't household sins in our own
Right.
community first.
Right.
That
And
would, if
there's
Christians would just reject those things, that would go a long way toward
right.
making the world a better place.
And honestly, there is a sector of Christianity that is at least attempting
Yeah,
to
that's true. I
to
don't want
own
to.
its sin, to own. And the problem is that there are different sectors of Christianity, just as there are of Islam and Judaism, and it's so that's why you don't have uh, in the Republican Party, you don't have all sectors of the Jewish faith supporting the Republican Party. You don't have all sectors of Christianity supporting the Republican Party. You don't have all sectors of Islam supporting the Republican Party, and the same for Democratic Party. They portions of each faith align with a different party, and it has a lot to do with aligning with their theological uh, values and mores, and so there's a recognition in segments of Christianity that we have done great harm. We have been responsible for the deaths of millions of people. We have been responsible for the reduction and the indignity of millions of people. We have been responsible for perpetuating economic systems that work against people of certain races. We've done all that. We have been a part of that. And there's that, and at least in their segments of Christianity, they're trying to start to address that and not doing it perfectly, but trying. But there's a whole other segment of Christianity that is oblivious to it and in fact disagrees with it and believes its mission from God is to enforce racial inequalities and to enforce inequalities with other groups of people, including the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. I have a dear friend who the only Christianity they've ever been a part of and ever known is evangelical Christianity. And she's in the process of leaving evangelical Christianity. And she's discovering for the first time that there are other ways of being Christian out there,
Mm-hmm.
like progressive Christianity that takes science very seriously. She is enthralled with progressive Christianity right now. And I think that's really helpful because there are a lot of people out there that feel like they're over a barrel, where they see value in certain parts of the Jesus tradition. So they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but they just can't continue in the way that faith has been expressed,
Yeah.
that they're used to. So what do? I just want to encourage those out there that may be in that position. There are other ways of being Christian,
That's
and,
right.
and they've been around longer than maybe the way that to be Christian. Go out there and find them. They're there.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Um,
I mean, again, with our reading this week, I don't use the language of Messiah. I know it's here. I understand the purpose for why it's here with the intent of the original authors, with the original audience. But in our own time and place and context today, I find it much more life-giving to just cut straight to the heart. Instead of using terms that mean this, just talk about what you mean. We're
mm-hmm.
talking about how the Jesus story still informs our work of making our world a more just, more compassionate, safe home for everybody. If
Mm-hmm.
that's what you mean by Messiah, fantastic. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
use that rhetoric. I'm not going to use that
Mm-hmm.
language. I would rather just say, how does the Jesus story inform our justice work today? And go
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah. No, that's wise. That's good stuff. And again, I don't think you will find Herb or I in any way trying to diminish the person of Jesus and what he wants
That's
to
right.
do. We're just there's a reframing that needs to happen to recognize what the true value of his life and teachings were.
Right.
It's not trying to take anything away. It's trying to give a better, clearer context for why he was so important and why his teachings still have relevance for today.
Yeah, I don't want to take away the intrinsic value of Jesus, but I do want to take away the harm that Christians have done to other communities, and
Right.
specifically this week with this week's reading, the Jewish community over these arguments that revolve
Right.
around messiahship. We could just do better. We can do
Yeah.
better.
And And it sounds pompous to say this, but I think Jesus, based on what he said and did, would be in agreement with that.
Yeah, let's remember Jesus was never a Christian.
Right.
He was a Jewish
Never
man his entire
intended
life.
for a Christian faith to develop. He was a reformer.
Yep, that's right. Well, that's what I've got this week, Todd. There's not a, I mean, there's not a lot to this week's passage, but that's what I've got.
Yeah. So, well, then that's what we'll do. And we'll pick up next week with the next passage. Herb, where can we find you?
You can find me at renewedheartministries.com and everywhere that will lead you afterward. Todd, where can we find you?
For a week and a half at glendalecitychurch.org and ongoing at toddjleonard.com. So thanks everybody for watching. We love being with you and look forward to seeing you next week.
Take care, everyone.